Hi, this is Phil from Kilauea, Kauai. Seminary Dropout is supported by listeners like you and me. You should support the show like I did. It's easy. Just visit supportseminarydropout.com and click Become a Patron.
You're listening to Seminary Dropout, episode 56, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. This week on the show, I'll talk with Kate Wallace about the Junia Project and Christian egalitarianism. All this and more on this week's episode of Seminary Dropout. Let's go. Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Seminary Dropout. Thank you so much for joining me. I've got a fantastic interview this week with Kate Wallace. I want to give a little bit of preface before this interview. This subject that we're going to talk about today has the potential to really rile some people up. And so I think part of that is okay. We need to have these conversations. But I want to always do that in love. And so let me preface this conversation that you're about to hear by saying I have very, very many complementarian friends and people that I love. And I do love them very, very much. And they love Jesus very, very much. And so as much as possible, in every way that I can, I want to affirm them as faithful followers of Jesus. Now, I happen to think that they are wrong on this issue. They happen to think that I'm wrong on this issue. And so we need to have a lot of grace moving forward. And I want to treat this subject, this issue with the respect and the dignity that it deserves. And so if you come from this place where you disagree, where you consider yourself complementarian, or maybe you just don't know where you are in that process, I hope that you can see this as a graceful conversation and at the very least, learn more about the other side. And if you are a egalitarian, then I hope that you as well can listen, be edified, and also go forth and have a productive conversation about this. Let's keep unity in Christ here. Let's keep some grace. Let's give some mercy to our brothers and sisters who don't see eye to eye on every issue. And I'm very excited about this. Kate Wallace is a co-founder of the Junia Project, operations manager for the Wesleyan Holiness Consortium, coordinator for the WHC Freedom Network, and an adjunct professor in political science. She's a committed Christian and a millennial feminist who enjoys writing and speaking on the intersection of politics, religion, and gender. Her favorite theologian is Gilbert Bilezikian, and she loves chocolate, dogs, hiking, J.K. Rowling, theater, and political theory. She holds a Master of Science from the London School of Economics and a Bachelor of Arts from Azusa Pacific University. Kate Wallace, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you're here representing the Junia Project, which you were a co-founder of. For those who don't know, talk a little bit about what the Junia Project does.
Junia Project is a community of men and women advocating for egalitarian theology and the inclusion of women at all levels of church leadership. And our website right now functions mostly as a platform for different writers from various viewpoints to write about that and to voice their opinion.
So you're a co-founder. How did it come about?
Well, the other co-founder of the Junia Project is my mother, Gail Wallace, and we both have our personal stories with this situation, the idea of women inclusion in leadership in the church. But we kind of, about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago now, we wanted to talk about this idea of men and women's equality in the church under God in our community. So we developed a presentation and presented it at Azusa Pacific University, where she worked at the time, and I now teach a class as an adjunct, and we got a great response, and people wanted to talk more about it and learn more about it. So we had people over to our house, and we heard other people's stories, and cried with them and laughed with them. And it kind of came out of that people wanted an online resource that was accessible and could be open to their views as well. And so we kind of just developed the Junia Project as a Facebook page and then a blog. It was not really intentionally supposed to be a blog, but it seemed to be the form that was the best for those who were looking for a resource. So that's kind of how that came about. It was through a lot of prayer and a lot of trying out new technology that we hadn't done before. But it seems to be something that's God's used for his kingdom. So we're thankful for that.
So was equality in the church an idea that you grew up with as a kid? With obviously your mom is championing that cause now. Is that something she came to, or had she been in that camp for a long time?
That's a great question. Equality between men and women in the church is something I had grown up with seeing, but it wasn't overtly taught. My parents were part of a church plant here in Southern California about 25 years ago, and it was just a small group of college students back then and young marrieds. It's now called Baseline Community Church, and we have been around for about 25 years, but the idea was we wanted to be inclusive for people who hadn't come to faith yet, and kind of following the Willow Creek original model. And we wanted to have women in leadership, and to choose leadership based on giftedness of the Spirit and not on gender. So I grew up in that church of everyone's involved because we need everyone, and it's small and it's community oriented, and women were in leadership as were men. And I just kind of saw it working really healthily. I never overtly heard it as a teaching. But my mom grew up as a missionary kid in Japan. Her father was called into the field by a female preacher in the American Baptist tradition. So
wow.
He was also always in favor of women in ministry and was a big supporter of her. So that was kind of her story. And it was great to grow up with parents who, modeled that really well for me. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really rare experience in evangelicalism.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of your posts on the Junia Project, because I've enjoyed them immensely.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah, one of them was the one that you did about egalitarian dating rules.
Yes.
It was a really fun post and really important. I think back in, when I was dating my wife, I was a newer egalitarian, and I was thinking through some of the things you talk about is like who pays for meals. Like the model that we've been given is that the male pays for the meals. And again, thinking back to when my wife and I were dating, I think that the fact that we were very poor more dictated that than anything else, that we just rarely did that kind of thing anyways. And when we did, we probably switched off. And then the other huge thing that you've got to deal with, it's so funny, Kate, like I've never thought about this, about how this changes dating and it adds a new element into the dating. But the whole concept of when do you have a conversation about gender roles?
Yeah.
And I know also from reading your posts that you've had direct experience with this, that I get the feeling you had a relationship where you felt like maybe that you waited too long to have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky because it seems like, well, first of all, there's not that much in church said to singles or those who are not married or those who've been married aren't anymore, except for like get married. And then
right.
And all of the dating advice is given mainly by, it seems like, complementarians or patriarchal people who've held that theology. So egalitarians are kind of left with like, well, that's great, but I guess our stuff is more, how do we battle some cultural ideals while honoring God? Like you were saying, who pays, who opens the door, who does those things. And yeah, my experience was with a very wonderful Christian man who I had met in college. And he was very sweet. We both loved Jesus. We both really enjoyed each other. And we just came from different backgrounds with this issue. And I had brought it up, but I guess not in depth. It was more of a, hey, do you think women should stay home and raise kids all day? Or, like that kind of just saying it on the second date. And he was like, well, no, logically it should be split up, by gifting. And I was like, okay, great. So it actually didn't bother me that his family functioned differently than mine. And I actually felt like I had learned a lot. Like there were, if it fits these people's strengths, if the wife has these strengths of child rearing and homemaking, the husband doesn't, then it can really work. And I watched that with his parents. And they're wonderful, gracious people. But that kind of started feeding into our relationship and expectations, and an ultimatum was kind of drawn when we started looking at marriage. And I just felt that, I'm not a futuristic thinker. So for me to plan on like marriage and children as my whole life is really difficult for me, just how I'm wired. But I also felt like my strengths didn't lie there. And I wanted to be able to maybe have that as part of my life, but also to mainly pursue whatever God was calling me outside of that. So we walked away from that. It was actually really painful. And I know a lot of people have stories that are similar to that, or they're in relationships where they feel like their significant other won't or can't have that conversation, or they don't know how to bring it up. So that, I know it's really difficult for a lot of people. So I thought writing about it in a blog, it was kind of like a silly blog, but I felt like it covered some questions that a lot of people were thinking.
Well, I don't know if I've ever seen another blog post on that. So it was definitely like there was a hole there that needed to be filled, because it's a conversation that's not ever happening.
Yeah. And we're throwing around different ideas of, but we're looking at like, what would an egalitarian marriage ceremony look like? Or, because different people think about that. There's a lot of symbolism that goes into male-female relationships, especially in a wedding, like the white dress, but the man doesn't have to wear white, so it's symbolizing the woman's purity, but not the man's. Or even like, we've had Christy Adams on our website has written about like changing last names. What does that mean, and the precedent that sets, or does that give a patriarchal mindset if you take the man's last name? So we're looking at talking more about that, because I think you're right. There's a void there that I think the secular world has looked into, but there's a lot of good meaning there for us as well. And we need to look at those questions as well.
Definitely. You touched on something that bothers me to no end, is that the church, if they don't explicitly say that God's desire for everyone is to get married and that's what we should be putting all our efforts to, if they don't explicitly say that, which some do, they infer that by everything that happens. And the life of the church is often centered around the family. And if singles are included at all, it's either with some kind of token singles ministry, which is like, which oftentimes is designed solely to hook those single people up with each other.
Exactly.
Or they're just kind of treated, they're not thought of, they're unintentionally marginalized. That's really frustrating when Paul was very clear that it was ideal for people to remain single. And it seems like the church has just pretty much completely ignored that.
Yeah, I've definitely thought about that as well. And if our primary example of how to live God-honoring lives as Christians is Jesus, who was also never married, it seems strange to ignore that in favor of a married lifestyle simply because our culture does that. And I've definitely thought about that. I struggle with it a little bit because the fact that we would look at marriage so highly, I think, is a good thing. I think the church used to have a lot of baggage on dealing with the flesh and sexual desires all being bad. Mm-hmm. So they would favor singleness just throughout church history. And I'm glad that we've kind of separated that, realizing that sex isn't bad or sinful if it's in marriage relationship. I think that's been good for the church. But I think, we've swung too far towards family, because now singles really don't have a place. How many single people are in church leadership? How many single people preach on a Sunday? So therefore, how many single people are spoken about or used as examples of holy living or Christ-honoring living in the church? Not many, in my experience. So Yeah, I think it's really important, and it affects women as well as men in different gendered ways, you know. So then if a man doesn't have a wife, people try to think like, well, what's wrong with him then? Which
Sure.
is yeah, it's a horrible question. And if a woman isn't married, then she's, in a lot of Christian circles, looked upon as not a full woman, because what it means to be a woman in a more traditional view is that you are married and have children. So if you're not doing that, you can't possibly have anything to provide to the community, is kind of the idea that gets thrown out there. So I think both men and women can have really negative experiences in church when marriage is looked upon as the ideal state. I was talking to one of my good friends and mentors. Her name is Grace, and she is divorced herself, and we were talking about, it's interesting that the church only really talks to married people because everyone in their life will be single at least once and probably twice, either after divorce or after the death of a spouse. And almost half of all adult Americans are single now. So to kind of ignore that as a either a life stage or a lifestyle option is kind of sad. And I think it misses a lot of people that the church could be ministering to.
As you were talking, I was thinking, I think there's also an attitude of, hey, until you're married with kids, you don't know what real life is. So, of course, I'm not going to let you, speak at my church or my Bible study or whatever, because what could you possibly teach me about life? And that just seems like the antithesis of the gospel and specific things that were said over and over again in the New Testament.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It seems, Jesus saying that there's not going to be marriage in eternity. Paul saying that, if you really have to, fine, get married. But if not, try to stay single so you can give your whole life to the gospel. It sure seems like the single state should be looked upon as a good option, not even just an option, but a really good one. Yeah, and the whole thing about not having life experience then is so funny, because all of us were in families at some time, right? We have parents, we have siblings, so we know what it's like to be in a family. I know raising your own has got to be different than that, but there's also things that are different about going through life as a single person and creating community outside of family that brings a whole nother aspect of life experience, I think, that's important to talk about.
The Junia Project hosted a while back an event for Sarah Bessey when she launched her book, Jesus Feminist. First of all, Jesus Feminist was really, really amazing, and the episode of this show where Sarah came on was one of my favorites. I want to talk a little bit about the feminist thing. On the Junia Project, some bloggers have pointed out that feminism and egalitarianism are related, but not exactly the same thing. And it's funny because I think it was just yesterday or the day before, Sarah had tweeted something about feminism being this radical idea that women are people too. And I retweeted it.
Yeah.
And then someone had tweeted back to both of us something to the effect of feminism also being the radical idea that it's okay to abort unborn women. And I didn't know this guy. I don't think Sarah knew this guy. His argument is not a new one. And I think my response to him was, why in the world are we letting the outside world singularly define what feminism is?
Sure.
Because I'm against abortion for the same reasons that I'm against war and capital punishment and all of those things, because I do think life is sacred. But I refuse to let other associations steal that label of feminism when we've been charged with redeeming things, when we've been charged with reconciling things. And that's something that's been addressed also on the Junia Project, right?
Yes, the topic of feminism and Christianity is very dear to my heart. for me, I like context, and I'm a student of political science and history. So for me, I loved reminding people that when you look back at history, feminism didn't start in the 1960s and 70s. It started with Christian women fighting in the temperance movement and fighting for the abolishment of slavery. And these Christian women learned how to participate in politics through those two fights, and really then launched into, well, we have the Holy Spirit within us as well. And it was Christian women who were the first ones to be like, so the Holy Spirit has something to say inside of me, let me say it in church. And feminism really came out of that. The first feminist polemics were written by Christian women in Britain and the United States. And we have significant historical documentation that that's exactly how feminism started. And even secular feminists acknowledge that. So the whole first wave of feminism, fighting for the right to vote, for women's suffrage, was led by Christian women. A lot of them had been preachers or would have been preachers, and were very influential in that fight. So we have Christian roots, and there are Christian and theological reasons why women should be viewed as full and equal citizens in the United States and Great Britain and around the world, and full and equal in the church. And feminism, that is really at the heart of feminism because it's at the beginning of it. And yes, especially during second wave feminism, during the feminism in the 1960s and 70s in the UK and in the United States, feminism took on different issues for quote unquote female equality. But I actually do think that they played a really important role. And even though maybe some Christian themes wouldn't agree with some of the things that feminists did in those eras, you can see why it would be important from a feminist perspective. If men had say over women's bodies for as long as history has been written, then it would be important historically from a secular point of view for women to have control over their own bodies. And I understand that as a feminist and an academic. And there will be that pull for some topics and some Christians, and not all Christians agree on when life begins, but I know abortion is a big one of those pools that is hard. It's a tension between feminism and Christianity. But I think that's okay. I think there's room for talking. There's room for dialogue and love and the interplay between Christianity and feminism to see what we believe about that and to open up a greater dialogue with some great minds. Some of my good friends are secular feminists, and they are some of the best thinkers I interact with. And my faith grows by listening to them and talking and hearing about what they believe on some of those controversial topics. So I think it's important to look at that, and I think it's important to remember that when we look at controversial issues. I'm not afraid of the title feminism or title feminist. I am a feminist, and I'm with you. I think reclaiming it might be more important than dismissing it or labeling it as baby killers and things like that, because those aren't going to help anyone and they're not true. And I think having that dialogue out of love will show Christ in us. I think it's good for everyone.
You had, in one of your posts, you recounted a conversation that you had with the guy who was, I guess the conversation started about why he chose the seminary he did. And one of the reasons was that it taught about biblical manhood and biblical womanhood, which I find is code for a lot of things. And so you were just asking him, to kind of explain that and unpack that a little bit. And through just a few really follow-up questions that were just kind of natural, it kind of fell apart over time. Can you tell a little bit about that conversation?
Yeah, as a graduation present from my master's, my parents sent me to this public speaking conference was what it was. And so I could gain some tools for my tool belt on if I was ever called to speak in something. So this young man was with a few of his friends from seminary or from the church that they were working at, and they were also at that conference. A lot of Christians were. So we sat down, started talking, and yeah, he went straight to straight to his seminary. And I said, why did you choose that seminary? I've heard a lot of things about it. Tell me what you think about your choice. And he went straight into the biblical manhood and womanhood thing. He was worried that some seminaries teach that women can preach, but he wanted to go to a seminary that taught that, the good, solid theology that only men preach and teach in the church.
I was honestly curious what someone who's theologically trained in this biblical manhood and womanhood theology, but who's not worried about their image or portraying something, if not a popular pastor. I was curious what they would say to something like questions that I honestly had about that message of biblical manhood and womanhood. So asking him questions like, well, okay, so I'm a single woman. What does that message say to single women? And he would say something like, well, it tells you to get married and have kids. And I was like, okay, that's kind of strange because it's kind of telling single women that their life isn't what it should be to be a biblical woman, so you have to change it. So I was like, okay, what about women who, their families don't make enough money for them to stay home? And then he kind of put that blame on the husband. Well, that means the husband isn't doing his job, and so she's not really being allowed to be a biblical woman. So it just started breaking down of like, okay, so you need money, or you need to be married, and women who can't have children, he really didn't know what to do with that scenario. It seemed to break down into building up an American dream is what it sounded like to me. This biblical manhood and womanhood seems to favor wealthy, healthy Americans with, who are married and have children and have a savings account. And it just seemed like that can't possibly be the story that the gospel actually tells for how we should live, because Jesus wasn't a lot of those things, and he didn't really have an income stream. He relied on wealthy women for his money, and it just seemed like it didn't talk about Jesus, and it didn't talk about how he and his disciples lived. It talked about more of the American dream, is what it seemed like to me.
Yeah. And the thing that I was thinking when I was reading that was kind of some of the things you brought up. Like, not only does it marginalize women, but it marginalizes the poor who can't afford to do that. And I was thinking, and I don't mean to in any way sound like I know what it feels like to be a woman, because that's obviously ridiculous. But I was thinking, my household would offend that model at every turn. For one, I work from home and I watch our 10-month-old daughter during the day. So there's that. I am watching my kids instead of my wife. My wife's working outside the home, so there's another problem. And she's a chaplain, so it's like a church role. It's like a ministry role that she's employed in. It's like we're just like a walking like offense to all, that model of biblical manhood and womanhood and that kind of thing.
Just by doing life as you've been gifted to do it.
Absolutely. And the life that makes the most sense. We're not out to make a statement, but I work from home anyways. I am able to watch my daughter. I like doing that. My wife's not able to work from home. Her job requires her to be out in the field, and but my income does not supply us with enough to get by on it alone. And so, we're doing what works for us, and in a way that I feel is really honors God in a wonderful, a beautiful way. I feel like it's just a very beautiful thing. But it's at every turn, it's against that mold of what we're often taught is biblical manhood and biblical womanhood.
Yeah. And I mean, the majority of people can't survive. Majority of families can't survive on one income anyway. Yeah. So it's kind of an unrealistic, message to proclaim anyway. It would mean that most people can't fit it, especially those who may have lost a spouse and they're alone. What are they supposed to do,
Yeah, and I think, too, it kind of exposes it for the very kind of ethnocentric thing that it is, because, I remember reading a while back about how really in the 60s, the cost of living started to outpace the income that had one working parent could afford. And they attributed it to the fact that women were starting to go to work. And so, the man all of a sudden didn't need to bring home as much as he had in the past relative to the cost of living. And so I feel like that's a very, it's a very American phenomenon of one partner having to, or being able to provide for the entire family and the other not. It's a very privileged phenomenon as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's the historical look at what industry, like the Industrial Revolution, does to a country, and how it changes it from a whole family working on a farm to, one person working in a factory and one caring for children. And work was really hard. And the whole generation before, the stay-at-home wives in the 50s, the women before were like, their mothers worked in factories and had very difficult jobs. It was a privilege to work so that your daughters didn't really have to, and creating a society where it was more like so their children in general wouldn't have to have such a hard life. But we kind of forget about those generations, and we pretend like, at least in that biblical manhood and womanhood model, we pretend like what happened in the 50s, which was really the only time in history it really happened.
Yeah.
And it only happened for middle to upper class white women for the majority, and we think it was for everyone. But we forget that, it was a wealth and status thing in the United States. It was a progress coming out of the Industrial Revolution and a few decades after that. And yeah, you're exactly right. We just forget, and we think that that the whole world is like us. And by us, I mean it's like a very small group of even wealthy Americans who can still do it. And it's just it's small-minded. We need to be open to a gospel that can apply to everyone and not just wealthy people.
That's well said. You told a story in one of your posts, and this is the other thing about the Junia Project, is that you don't just deal with equality in the church, but also, and I guess these aren't mutually exclusive by any means, but also just misogyny in general and the kind of harassment that women have to endure a lot of times, and especially within the church.
Yeah.
You told a story that when you told the story of what happened, what someone said to you, my jaw dropped. I was kind of blushing. I could not wrap my mind around that this had actually happened. But you told a story about going to a conference, and you went with a friend who was selling some books, and you were selling them at the table. Do you know the story I'm referring to?
Yes. I think the post you're referring to talked about street harassment, and then
Right.
I kind of made up a term for when it happens in Christian settings of sanctuary harassment, kind of like a space you think is going to be safe because it's Christian, and then it turns hostile because of that kind of harassment. The story I think you're referring to, I went to help sell some books of an author I really like who's become a friend, and a man came up to the table, and he gave me the money for the book, I gave him the book, and then he didn't leave. So I kind of looked at it and thanked him for buying it, and he said something like, my daughter tells me I need to find a new Christian wife. Are you selling anything else tonight? Something like that. And in the post, I bring it up because I think people aren't fully aware of how often that kind of thing happens in the Christian setting. And it doesn't happen as much from my experience in the Christian setting as it does outside of the church, but it still does happen. And that idea of misogyny, that whole mindset still filters in. And trying to be aware of what women go through day to day, even in Christian community, was kind of the idea of the post, and why we need we need a better theology surrounding the relationships between men and women, or else the this idea of male rule or patriarchy will trickle into those kind of behaviors, that men think it's okay to act a certain way to women, or to buy things from women, or women become commodities as opposed to people.
And I think, too, when I hear that, I think no one thinks that that's okay.
Right.
And yet, I think surely no one thinks that's okay. And yet, I fear, like, if that story gained popularity, like, I fear what the reaction might be from some people, especially those in power. Because I think that, you know, if churches are what they're supposed to be, a place for broken people, then things are going to happen, but we should at least be quick to point them out as awful things.
Right.
If that makes sense. And my fear is that a lot of people would not do that and would make up excuses. And I feel like we see that a lot in the church with the kind of cover-ups we've had, with all kinds of awful sexual allegations that have come up.
Sure. Yeah, it seems like we see that quite a bit, excusing behavior instead of calling it out and addressing it. I think you said it so well. Church is a place for broken people. And we're all dealing with our own stuff, and it's going to come out in how we interact with others. And I think being a place that's open to broken people, but I think you're exactly right. Calling it out and keeping people accountable, and keeping children and those like really safe, making sure that it's a safe place for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And creating safe places where those kind of things that the awful things with children that cannot happen, and all that kind of stuff. Kate, I'm curious how we have this conversation in a way that's productive. Because I feel like a lot of times we're preaching to the choir, and, you know, we say the things that we say and we believe them to be true, but we also know that we've got a bunch of people who agree with us, who are listening, and they're going to say, yeah, and that's the way it is, you know, and we all kind of circle the wagons.
Sure.
And I think we, you know, if we turn off someone who disagrees with us because we speak the truth, that's fine. But if we do it in a way because we're being cocky, because we feel like we know the truth and someone doesn't, and we're better people for that, then I wonder how productive that is. And so I'm just curious how we have the conversation in a productive way.
I think that's something that people in general, but especially the church, needs to figure out on a lot of different topics. I think. I certainly don't have that figured out, but we're trying to figure that out on the Junia Project. Even from, like, we would like to be a space where people can ask the questions and people can have those conversations. We don't allow in, like, our comments really snarky or mean comments, and we say that up front. And a lot of times if someone writes one like that, we don't just automatically erase it. We'll email them and say, hey, we think you have a really great question. We'd really like to interact with it. Do you think you could make it fit this comment policy of actually saying what your question is or what your comment is without blaming the other commenter, or, you know, like things like that, to try to keep it. So, and most people say, like, thank you, I'm sorry, you're right, I really actually meant this. And they have this wonderful thought through question or comment, and it really helps the conversation. But it is hard, and I think so many of these conversations happen online, and people act differently online than they do in real life.
Yes.
They're less worried about how they come across, and it's really difficult, but we really try, and we all fall into that wanting to think that we just know everything. I definitely fall into that. And it's always good to remember that we have a lot of things to learn, and the church is this big mosaic of different times in history that we all live, and different cultures, and different even just like common sense changes from generation to generation, right? And culture to culture, and we have to remember that we're not going to know everything, and we need the other voices. I think that's a big key to it, because it changes your tone when you remind yourself when you're talking that you don't know everything. I don't know. It helps me. I'm like,
Yeah, absolutely.
I can learn from the person who I'm disagreeing with. And what I think Christians could actually do that better, or at least it makes sense to me logically. We haven't really shown that in a lot of ways, but we all seek out truth, and we think there is a truth. And I feel like that gives a goal. So even though, I might not agree with John Piper or Wayne Grudem or these men who hold different beliefs about what the Bible says about women and men, I believe that they're looking for truth. And I'm also seeking truth from Scripture about those topics. And I think that would help us if we could actually come together and talk about that, because I think we could pray through that, and as a community, hopefully find the spaces where we can help each other think differently. Because I think there is a truth, and I'm not sure if we'll see it this side of eternity, but it's worth fighting for and worth trying for.
Well, Kate, I've had such a good time talking with you. Is there anything else that you'd want to say or leave with us before we go?
Well, this has been wonderful, and thank you for your really thoughtful questions. It's been so much fun to talk with you. It's made me really curious about you and your wife, and it gives me hope that there might be some sort of model that I could like enough to pursue in the future. But
well, if you want to come and hang out with the Blackshears, you've got an open invitation.
Thank you. I might do that.
Sounds good. Well, Kate, first of all, tell everybody where they can find the Junia Project online and all those kind of things.
Well, we are www.juniaproject.com. It's JUNIA project.com. We're also on Facebook and Pinterest and Twitter. And we're just a place for people to explore egalitarian theology and all the themes that interacts with in life, from dating to family to church leadership and Christian community in general. So come on by, because we love to hear what everyone has to say.
Interesting side note. This never happens, but I'm pretty sure that I first found out about the Junia Project from Pinterest and my Pinterest page.
Really?
So yeah. I don't remember how exactly, but I'm 99% sure that's how I found out. So,
well, that's wonderful. We love Pinterest at the Junia Project.
So for the listeners, we'll have all of the links to everything that Kate just mentioned on the show notes, including that Pinterest page. So, Kate Wallace, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you, Shane.
Hey, are you interested in hearing talks on spiritual development from people who have walked the talk? What about one-on-one life coaching from people who really love Jesus and also love you? And what about creativity? Have you ever wondered how you could use your creativity, your passions to serve God? Well, the Ragamuffin Retreat might just be for you. Some of you might remember my interview with David Leo Schultz, the director of Ragamuffin, which is the Rich Mullins biopic. Well, he's doing a Ragamuffin retreat now, actually a series of retreats. They've already had the first one, and the second one is coming up pretty soon. There's going to be one here in Texas, and I'll be in that one. That's going to be in November 7th through 9th. And the next one coming up is in Pennsylvania, October 24th through 26th. The deadline for both of them is October 15th. So make sure that you register before then. Go check out the site, colorgreenfilms.com/retreats. colorgreenfilms.com/retreats. I'm going to be there, like I said, in the Texas one, November 7th through 9th. I am so excited. This is going to be not your average conference. I mean, this is going to have some depth to it. There's going to be quiet time alone. There's going to be space from the noise. And you're going to be hearing from people who are extremely wise. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm not connected to this retreat in any official way. I'm not being paid to say any of this. All I'm saying is I'm going to be there. I'd love to see you there. And you should check it out. I need to thank the latest iTunes reviewers who gave a rating and a review for Seminary Dropout on iTunes. Elder Stu 7, Casey B from Connecticut. Actually, it says Casey B from CT is the username. You could be from Christianity Today, but I'm going to say you're probably from Connecticut. Thank you, Stu and Casey. Wow, those were just very kind reviews. That meant so much to me. So thank you for that. Remember, your rating and your review and your subscription keep Seminary Dropout front and center on iTunes, and that really, really helps out the show. I need to thank the newest supporter for Seminary Dropout, Jeremy. Jeremy, thank you so much for your contribution. Remember, you can go to Support Seminary Dropout to support the show. And I want to remind everybody that all episodes of Seminary Dropout are online and for free. And if you like this episode, you might like my previous episodes with Sarah Bessie, that's Seminary Dropout 25, and Seminary Dropout number 31 with Haley Grace Scott. If you enjoyed this one, you'll really enjoy those. So go check out the back catalog. If you're new to Seminary Dropout, you might be surprised at some of the guests that have been on the show who you have been reading their works for a long time. I'd love for you to go check that out. You can go to shaneblackshear.com to do that. And of course, it's always on iTunes as well. All right, that's all for this week. Stay tuned next week for another fantastic episode of Seminary Dropout. Thanks to DL Rossi for the music you're hearing right now.